Ready, set, live. Welcome to Campaigning 101. It's great to see our Gov Trek participants again. Today, it's about you and your campaign simulation. We have a jam-packed agenda and some esteemed speakers joining us today who will be covering core topics that will help you succeed and complete your campaign simulation. The topics we're about to cover include a behind-the-scenes look at running a political campaign, messaging, branding, and speech writing, and the art of public speaking. So listen up and be sure to take notes today, or pictures with your phone, whatever method works for you girls. Today is a critical day, and the session will also be recorded. Following our speakers, you will have 1 full hour to work with your campaign teams and your breakout room facilitators. But before we introduce our first inspiring speaker, I want to do a quick informal poll for our assigned candidates. So the political candidates on each team, can you raise your hand if you have decided on what race you're running for? This is for the candidates. Have you chosen your race? Okay, I see 2 so far. Do we have any more? Let's see. Oh, 3? Excellent. Okay, excellent. So this, our next speaker, Ellen Montanari, had asked for that feedback so that she can tailor her presentation. She's going to be talking about campaigning. And hold on 1 second, I just lost my notes. So thank you everyone for doing that. So let me introduce our first speaker. We are honored to introduce Ellen Montanari. She is the Deputy Campaign Manager for Congressman Mike Levin, who will be giving you a behind-the-scenes look at running a political campaign. Ellen started on Congressman Mike Levin's campaign in 2017 during his first run for Congress. Prior to working in the campaign, she owned an executive development firm and a small publishing company. She never had any intention of working in politics, but with the political climate in 2017, she felt she needed to jump in. She's currently the Congressman's Deputy Campaign Manager. So let's give a warm welcome to Ellen. Thank you for joining us today, Ellen.
Glad to be here. Hi, everyone. I do hope you have paper and pencil in front of you because I'm going to be giving you some ideas for whatever it is that you're going to be doing for your campaign. So, I'm going to be focusing primarily on the work that I did in the campaign for Congressman Mike Levin. He's a United States House of He's in the United States House of Representatives, and that is a district of about 760,000 people, and there's 52 miles of coastline in 2 counties. So that'll give you a sense of the size. But first, I want to talk to you about the differences between the different types of races. And pretty much what you have to be looking at is the number of people who live in the district along with the geographic size. Larger campaign races like ours are very specialized. For example, when it comes to digital advertising, there is a specialist who does that. TV advertising, a specialist who does that. There's a field director, there's a volunteer recruiter. So as Deputy Campaign Manager, I know about all of those different jobs, but there are some that I'm not going to be very much involved with because what I know about TV advertising, you could put on my little finger. Plenty of room left over. Compare that with a smaller race where people wear more hats. So typically in smaller races, there's no TV advertising. They focus almost completely on direct voter contact. Then the really large races like US Senate or governor or something like that, it's actually mostly TV. If you think about the size of our state, there's over 39 million people who live in the district, in the state. So what happens then is it's mostly TV to reach voters, and then there'll be meet and greets around the state with the candidate. And like, for example, when Barbara Boxer was in the race back in 2004, she made it a point of visiting, having a meet and greet in every single county. There are a lot of candidates who don't do that, especially with the smaller counties. The field work then, and I'm going to be talking a lot about field work. The field work then is primarily done through either, depending upon what the candidate is, a Democrat or Republican, they work through those clubs. So there'll be someone assigned to the clubs to help them do the direct voter contact. And since there are thousands of those clubs in our state, you can imagine trying to manage that is pretty difficult. So what I'm going to be talking about a lot today, so that's the difference between the different sizes of races, so keep that in mind as you're doing your own planning. So in our campaign, I'm going to talk primarily about voter contact in the field, because no matter what size your race is, that's going to be something that you're going to need to do. Now, when I'm talking about voter contact in the field, what I'm talking about is face-to-face, texting, calling, and meet and greets. So let me talk a little bit about face-to-face contact, which is really about meet and greets and knocking on doors. Face-to-face contact, whether it's with a volunteer, a staff member, or the candidate himself or herself, is by far the most effective voter contact. This has been proven over and over again in research. So people talk about texting, they talk about postcarding, all of that sort of thing. Face-to-face contact is the way to go. The field director is responsible for this kind of direct voter contact. So it's face-to-face contact is number one. Number two is phone calls. And then we save texting for when it's time for get out the vote. And I'll talk a little bit about GOTV, or Get Out the Vote, in a little bit. If you're like me, I thought GOTV was a TV station. So if you knew it was not that, you were much farther along than I was when I first entered the race. So there are really two keys to success out in the field. The first one is identifying supporters of your candidate and maintaining contact with them. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. The second key to success is recruiting, training, and retaining volunteers. So let's talk about identifying supporters. This is a huge part of the field director's job. So how do you identify supporters? You are either knocking on their door and asking them if they support the candidate, through meet and greets. And then what's really important, because it's all about asking, you've got to ask. So can we count on your support? Then it's really important to maintain contact with those potential supporters. You cannot count on them. If you make contact with them 1 month, you cannot count on them remembering who you are in a month. So you maintain contact through texting, through emailing newsletters, through inviting them to all kinds of events and that sort of thing, okay? So, did I say newsletter? I can't remember if I said newsletters. And then finally, in the month before the election, that's 1 month before the election, when the ballots are in their hands, then you switch over from identifying supporters to taking that big group of supporters that you found and getting them to the polls. That's the GOTV, it's Get Out the Vote. And you bug them until they turn in their ballots. And they're going to be sick of you, but that's, on one level, that's going to be okay if you just say, well, this is a really important race, and I know that we've contacted you several times, but if you turn in your ballot, these phone calls go away. So that's the important part there. So field staff cannot do all of this alone. You absolutely have to have volunteers, which is the second key to success that I said was recruiting, training, and retaining volunteers. So where do you find them? Every single meet and greet, you are going to be passing out, sorry, my daughter is sending me messages on my phone and it's making me a little nuts. every single meet and greet, you should have someone there passing around a sheet saying, are you willing to donate? Are you willing to volunteer? There'll be people who donate over, through Act Blue or whatever platform your candidate is using. Those smaller donors especially are great potential volunteers. You're going to go to high schools and colleges to recruit. They become your interns, and they are the bread and butter of a campaign. And then also going to the clubs. Again, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're a Democrat, you go to the Democratic clubs. Republicans, you go to the Republicans club. So that's where you find your volunteers. What I was really known for, and what our campaign was really known for, was training the volunteers. We do not let them have any voter contact until we've trained them and had them practice on each other before they ever have voter contact. Before they go knocking on doors, we have them on the phones and talking to voters that way, because that's a little bit easier than talking to someone at the door. So that's really important to do that. And then retaining is the last piece. How do you retain volunteers? By making sure they feel important. If they don't show up, you call them and say, is everybody okay? And I just want to make sure you were all right. You don't say you didn't show up for your shift. You say, wow, is everything okay? Making sure you thank them every single time. You greet them when they walk in the door. This may sound really simple, but when you're really busy, those sorts of things fall by the wayside. And then if somebody doesn't feel important, there's lots of other races out there that they can volunteer for. So, and not just that, but they also could volunteer at the local Humane Society, right? So anything that you can do, whether it's follow-up emails or texts or, to say thank you, we really appreciate it when you're coming in next, those kinds of things really help. Let me look at my notes here. Okay, so remember earlier when I said there are two keys to success. One is IDing supporters and maintaining contact, and the second is recruiting and training. So what happens if I want you to be thinking a little bit about this GOTV, the get out the vote time, because if you're identifying supporters, you're maintaining a list of who those supporters are so that you can go back and once they have their ballots in hand is that you're getting them to vote, whether it's in person or mail-in ballots or whatever. So please don't forget that once you hit that GOTV time, the get out the vote time, when they have the ballots in their hands, you stop identifying supporters. You're done with that. You're taking your existing supporters and making sure they get to the polls. Now, if you haven't identified a whole bunch of supporters, I would suggest that you keep doing that. But remember that when you're designing your plans, that you've really got to work very, very hard in the lead up to the ballots going out. You really have to focus on identifying supporters. Okay, so that's my presentation in a nutshell. What I'd like to do now is open it up to any questions that you have. And Sean, I'm going to let you be the timekeeper on that.
Thank you, Ellen. That was so insightful. I'm taking notes too. So the first girls to get their hands up get to ask Ellen a question. All right, let's start with Sydney.
I guess my question would be, as far as like speeches and things like that a lot of people will end up seeing, what would you say is like the most important thing to remember when either writing or giving that speech, like things to include or to be careful of?
Oh, well, somebody will be talking about that a little bit more when it comes to actually giving the speech. I can tell you from my perspective that first of all, being very personable. So you're telling personal stories. That's number one. Number two is that you know who your audience is, because you're going to talk very differently to high school students than you will to senior adults in a senior living facility. And with that comes with being very clear about what you stand for and why, and how it ties in with that particular group of people you're talking to. And then the last thing is asking for their vote. Sometimes what you do is you have the candidate should be saying, and I hope that that you plan on voting for me. And then that person asks that the volunteers or staff that are in the audience that are handing out the clipboard say, if you'd like to donate, you can do it here. If you would like to volunteer, you can do it here. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. Okay, Jolena.
Hello. My question is how to get possible voters interested, because I have discussed with many people about certain topics and they don't seem to find it as important as I do. So I want to know, what is the best way to get more people involved, kind of?
Oh, Jolena, that is a great question, because we found in this last election that people were more disengaged than any of us ever expected. It was very difficult to get volunteers, and it was very difficult to get people interested in this particular election. So what we found was most effective was listening, asking questions. So what are you interested in? What's important to you? And I often give them some examples to start with. In our district, which is coastal, in northern San Diego County, coastal side, and then southern Orange County along the coast, a lot of people are interested in the environment. They're interested in San Onofre because it's right in our backyard. So abortion, I will sometimes, when I ask, what are you interested in? I list some of those possible topics. And if they say, oh yeah, the environment, I say, well, tell me more. So it's all about asking the questions of the voter and then, or the volunteer, or whoever it is that you're talking to. And then depending upon what they say, you're going to tie in what they're interested in to where your candidate stands. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
It's a very good question.
Thank you, Jolena. Do we have any other questions for Ellen? Erica Wilson.
Okay, I can't put on my video. Yes, I'm one of the facilitators, but I do have a question about some of the techniques or some of the things that you've suggested. Over this last election, I must have gotten, 15, 20 texts or emails every day from candidates. And a lot of these were candidates that I did support, but I got so sick of getting all of these texts and emails. And I know a lot of my friends felt the same way. How do you keep contact with your supporters without turning them off?
That's a good question, Erica. For all the people who complain about it, and I certainly am one of them too, I got all of those and probably way more than anybody else given my job. The reality is that they work. So you might be annoyed by them, but they work. All of those times you get a text asking for money, it generates money. I would actually contact our finance director and say, enough already with the emails about the text. And he'd say, Ellen, the last text alone got $20,000 when we just asked for $5. So that's what's happening with that, Erica. Obviously, if people don't want to get them, they can say stop. Now, we very rarely text. Our experience with texting, is that that third-party texting works better for us. In other words, another group, whether it's Planned Parenthood or an Indivisible or a club, saying, hey, please support such and so person, or please give such and so person, a donation. That works better than when we ask for it. The only time we text is when we're trying to reach 18 to 35-year-old voters, and we actually get another group to do that specializes in that age group, texting that age group. And then we'll do it ourselves during GOTV. During the get out the vote time, because it does show that postcarding and texting at that time are very effective. So I don't have a great answer, Erica, except to say all of those texts and emails work, as annoying as they are.
Wonderful. Thanks for the question, Erica. And we're unfortunately out of time. Thank you very much, Ellen, for joining GovTrek today. Ellen will be available by text. Speaking of text, we will share that with the girls after the program. So thank you again, Ellen, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So let's move on to our next speaker, our wonderful speaker, Hillary Nemchik. We are honored to introduce Hillary, who will be covering messaging, branding, and speech writing. Hillary has spent 15 years of her career working in government and politics. During that time, she worked for the City of New York, the State of California, and most recently, the City of San Diego, where she served as Director of Communications for the City Attorney's Office. So let's please welcome Strategic Communications Executive Hillary Nemchik.
Hi there, good morning. Can everyone hear and see me? Great, okay, excellent. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm so inspired to know how many young women are in this room who are interested in pursuing a career in public service. What really kind of drove me and got me involved was I've always been very passionate about violence prevention, specifically violence against women and gender-based violence. So when I was finishing up grad school and looking for my first job, I was really often thinking about, okay, I really like government and politics. I find it interesting. I really have always found speech writing really interesting. And so I tried to think of an avenue that I could take to sort of check those boxes. And I researched a lot of different politicians, and I found one in New York City, where I'd recently moved from Arizona, who really had done a lot in the realm of domestic violence prevention. He was an assembly member and had passed the New York State's first anti-strangulation bill. So I really wanted to work for him. So they had an actual speech writing job posted on the website. And so I applied and did not get it, was not even close, because I had no experience. And so what I did is I learned about a fundraiser that he was having, and I made my way in. It was $20 to enter, which was a heck of a lot of money for me at that time. I was working at a coffee shop right out of grad school. And so I just showed up at this fundraiser and didn't know a single person, had my resume in my purse, and was just trying to get an unpaid internship so I could get in there, work, and start to get the experience. So I happened to bump into the person I had emailed with about the speech writing job. And I said, hey, do you have any unpaid internships? And she said, yeah, I'm glad to see you here. We certainly do. Why don't you, here's my card, email me tomorrow. And I said, well, would you like my resume? And she was like, yeah, email me tomorrow. So emailed her tomorrow, and then sort of the rest is history. I got in on the ground floor as an unpaid intern, and within 2 months was hired as a very entry-level staffer, and just sort of worked my way up and eventually became a director in that office. And that's sort of how I got my start. And sort of why I share that story is because it's sort of a combination of luck and perseverance and open doors, and just trying to find the things you care about, find opportunities to lean into them, and then, look for any open door. This fundraiser that I just happened to hear about through the grapevine was that open door for me. So I'll step back now. I'd love to get into the meat of this conversation because we've got a lot to cover. So worked on a lot of campaigns, was a campaign manager, really communication is just so fascinating to me. So I'd love to share some tips and tricks on developing a very persuasive stump speech. Can I have the next slide, please? Great. So what is a stump speech? I think many of us have heard a politician get up, say what they're going to do, and, get everybody riled up. So you really want to make sure your stump speech is concise and compelling. Much like Ellen said, you want to use personal narrative and your personal stories as much as possible. Also, echoing Ellen, it is critical that you tailor your message to your audience. There's nothing more important. You cannot go and talk to a group of teachers as if you were talking to a group of construction workers. You really have to know and research the audience, know the room before you go in, so that you can talk directly to them and directly to the things they care about, and highlight the things from your background that are going to resonate the most with that audience. Next is explaining why you are uniquely qualified for this role. Why are you and no one else the right one for the job? What sets you apart? And then again, as Ellen so articulately said, call to action. Vote for me, volunteer with me, donate to me, endorse me. You always want to end with a call to action that's very clear and gives people that next step. You'll also want to have a couple of versions of your stump speech. A brief one, 60 seconds. You have just a little bit of time to articulate exactly why you're running and why someone should vote for you. 3 minutes, that's kind of the version I'm going to be talking about a little more in depth, the 3-minute version. I think that's the most common typically when you're going to a debate or a town council meeting or a political party club that you're seeking their endorsement. You usually get about 2 or 3 minutes to articulate your message. And then 5 minutes, there's also venues for that as well. You can really kind of delve into some of the policy areas that you want to develop. Slide, please. So just kind of breaking this down, here is sort of the architecture of a speech, of a really persuasive stump speech. When I was in graduate school, I studied communication as well, and I taught Public Speaking 101, and we used to have a module on a particular persuasive structure called Monroe's motivated sequence, and I based this on that kind of principle. So if you're interested in looking up Monroe's motivated sequence, that's a really kind of classic persuasive speech writing structure. So you always want to start with an attention-grabbing introduction. So I kind of created a really rough, really basic stump speech that I'll kind of show you the elements as we go through these, and we can kind of delve in from there. So the particular office that I'm talking about, and I know Ellen was talking a lot about a congressional race, so I thought I'd really zoom out and do, or I should say zoom in and do a much more hyper local race that's often, not something people think of. So I'm thinking of a water board race. So District 7 water board race is the race. My audience is a town council meeting. Town councils, I'm sure many of you are aware, are often a really good place for candidates to go introduce themselves to the community, rally support, rally volunteers, because folks at town council meetings are often engaged in the community and invested. And so they want to see a candidate succeed that's going to align with their values. So I'm a District 7 water board candidate, and I'm at a town council meeting. So I'm going to start with an attention-grabbing introduction. Did you know the District 7 Water Board has never had an environmental scientist on its board? Did you know that a woman has never been able to, or has never served on this water board? Well, my name's Hillary Demchick, and I'd be the first woman and the first scientist to serve on the District 7 Water Board. So in that attention-grabbing introduction, I piqued some interest. I also kind of built my credibility by talking about my background. By the way, I'm not an environmental scientist. And I was able to also talk about what the seat is that I'm running for, and talk about how special it would be to have someone with my background and also the first woman to serve on this board. So kind of did a lot in that quick introduction. So now I'm going to adapt to my audience. So thank you to the Townsville Town Council for inviting me here to talk about my campaign and why I'm running. I'm no stranger to the town council because my mom served on a town council for 5 years when I was growing up. So I really appreciate the work that you all do firsthand, and the work that you do and your commitment to the community. So that's a little bit about, relating to that audience. And then you want to tell the story of why you decided to run. So because we have just a little bit of time, I'm going to kind of merge that in with this next section, and I'm only going to identify one problem and one solution. If you have a little more time, obviously you will, delve into your 3. But I would say that having your top 3 priorities, so a problem that you're going to solve, is core to your message. And even if you only have 60 seconds, you want to say the 3 reasons why you're running, how you're going to make the community better. So those 3 are really important. I would like to emphasize that, although I'm just going to give you one because we have a very short time to discuss this today. So I know everyone recalls the devastating impact of the toxic spillage in Lake Crystal Blue that occurred in 2018. We've all been dealing with the repercussions, the death of hundreds of birds. We have no clean lake to swim in on hot summer days. So that's the problem. If elected, I will bring my expertise as an environmental scientist and my work, and I will work with my colleagues on the board to implement policy that would prevent such a spill from ever happening again. I'll also secure the proper funding to continue the needed cleanup of this site so that we can all once again enjoy Lake Crystal Blue. So problem solution, that's how you're going to deliver that when you're elected. So this next piece is interesting and can be, you don't want to be too corny, and maybe you think this example is corny, so I'm open to that critique as well. But you want to kind of project your audience into the future. What will it look like? What will an improved future with you in this seat look like for them? So imagine the birds are chirping, the sun is shining on a hot summer day, and you feel the cool rush of the lake as you dive into Lake Crystal Blue. When elected as District 7 Water Board member, I will work to make this a reality for all of us. And then, of course, the most important part, you call your audience to action. Now, I'm seeking the endorsement of this town council so that I can put it on my mailers, I can put it on my website, and I can say that Townsville Town Council supports Hillary Nemchick for District 7 Water Board. And that's really important to seek those endorsements as you go through the election process, because it means a lot. Folks in that community will see Townsville Town Council. That's a really credible endorsement. It means the community is behind this candidate and is supporting them. So that's why I'm at this Town Council today. So now I'll conclude with a call to action. Today, I ask for your endorsement. An endorsement from this community will make all the difference in this race. There's no more powerful endorsement than the voice of our community, the Townsville Town Council. So I urge you, please endorse my campaign today. Join me in working to make Crystal Blue Lake more clean and more accessible to this entire community. You can volunteer with me. You can email me at xyz@gmail.com to learn about volunteer opportunities. And I encourage you, on November 5th, please vote for Hillary Nemchick as District 7 Water Board Council member. So that's my call to action to conclude. And then the next slide, please. So just a little bit, and how am I doing on time, Shauna? Is it time for questions yet?
We have 6 more minutes.
Okay,
total.
great. I'll breeze through this in 1 minute. Okay, so again, I can't stress the importance enough of understanding who's in the room and who's in the audience. So before you deliver your speech in any setting, you want to make sure you know who's in the room. Is your opponent also going to be there? Are their supporters going to be there and be present? There were times where we showed up at a debate and we had our opponent there with a whole team of people holding signs. So if you think that might happen, if your opponent's going to be there, you should maybe think about having your team there holding signs to support your campaign. Or maybe you don't know if they're going to do that or not. It's always a good strategy to show a groundswell of support in the room for your campaign if your opponent is going to be present. Also, try to memorize the key points and deliver your speech off the cuff. Use those personal stories. Really just try to think of those 3 core issues, memorize them, think about how you talk about them. And if you just need to have them on a little note card that you hold in your hand, that's totally fine. Nobody, judges anyone who has a quick note that they reference during their speech, but I would suggest to never read from your phone. I notice a lot of folks doing that nowadays. And even though I know exactly what they're looking at notes. It's just hard to disassociate someone looking at their phone and being present in this audience. And you really want to connect with them and make them feel a connection to you. So I would recommend never to use your phone as notes in any setting, really, in public speaking. And then always practice with your advisors and game plan for those challenging questions. So you know that they're going to ask you about a really difficult policy. And so you really need to do your homework on the questions that are going to be hard for you to answer. And there'll be really hot issues that you may have to, that might be hard for you in your position to answer. So you really want to do your homework and know what those tough issues are. The other suggestion I have is in a room, you have some of your supporters in there, have them ask questions that you want to answer so that you get to delve into your strengths and the things that you want to accomplish a little bit more. So you've got, a couple of campaign volunteers in the town council audience, raise your hand and ask a quick question about how they're going to, how are you going to make Crystal Blue more blue? So that's always kind of a nice strategy as well. And then of course, practice, just, practice in front of your friends, your family, get feedback. Be open to feedback and always just try to improve. You can, you'll deliver to an audience and you'll see what really works, what lights up their eyes when you start to see nodding and engagement. And then when you start to see that they're not paying attention or gazing off into the distance, you can know maybe those are areas you can tighten it up, maybe make shorter. Shorter is always better. So that's it for me. I'd love to answer any questions that you all might have. I think the next slide. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Hillary. Does anyone have any questions for Hillary? The first girls to get their hands up get to ask her the questions. All right. We have one from Julia Dane. Julia, go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for that presentation. But also, how would you recommend, like, in the case of the audience having like particularly tough questions, like how would you recommend brainstorming so you can properly prep your candidate to answer them?
That's great. A great question and super important. So what I would do to help my candidate know what kind of room they're walking into is I would look at the members of the board. So who are these folks? What are their connections? Most of the time you can Google anyone and find out what other organizations they belong to. So you can see, are these, is the president a huge environmentalist? Are they a huge gun rights activist? Or that, you kind of get to know the individuals on the board and what they stand for. Mostly you can accomplish that through Google. You can also, oftentimes these meetings are public. And so oftentimes their videos are posted. So you can go and just take a look back. I know it's time intensive, but it's really important to know what kind of room you're walking into. So you can go look back at other videos of what's been covered in the past, specifically on like a town council. And you can also look at their agendas. Most groups have their agendas from months past up on their website. So you can see what kind of topics they cover, and you can get a sense of where the pinch points are and where they stand on issues.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, Sydney Herder.
Hi, my question for you is if you could go back and tell your younger self something that you thought is important, either about your job or just life in general, what would it be?
That is such a great question and not one that I have a prepared answer to. I would say that I would tell my younger self to not be so worried about not being good enough or to be more secure, to know that I'm a hard worker, that I'm doing my homework, that I'm showing up prepared, and to not second guess that. And I mean, I'm still telling myself that, so.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think Sydney.
Like the Sydney Pixley, this one?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think like we talked a lot about like things to like make sure you do and things to say. And I guess my question is kind of like what maybe not to do, like maybe like how to make sure like things to stay away from or potential like errors, things like that.
Sure. I would say don't talk too long. Never talk too long. Always err on the side of short. If somebody gives you 3 minutes, try to be like 2:45. because nobody wants to hear it. It's just very frustrating when you have candidates that drone on and on and on. And I see it constantly. When I was on the trail and going to Democratic Club meetings, that's the race, that I was working toward in San Diego, and an endorsement is up. Every single candidate, I would say 80% of them either spoke the whole time or ran way over. And it's just like, it shows that you're not prepared. It shows that you're more in your own head and less present with your audience if you're not engaging with them, listening, and just getting their vibe. Because at 5 minutes, I've heard enough. If you can't distill your message, then I lose some confidence in your abilities. So I would say that's one big one. I would say you have to tread lightly in terms of, being too contentious with your opponent. Now, sometimes your opponent attacks you and you have to respond. And so I would say when it's the candidate speaking, to be as diplomatic as possible, but also firm and fighting back. So call it out and own it. If somebody is trying to say a lie or really mischaracterize something about you, call it out, be straightforward about it, but try to avoid looking petty or like you're emotionally flustered by it, although you may very well be, and with good reason, because it gets pretty dirty sometimes. There's a lot of bad stuff that is not always fun to deal with on the campaign. Misinformation, lies, just meanness. And so try to rise above that to the best that you can and just keep your eyes on the prize and focus on winning the race, because ultimately that's the best comeback.
Thank you so much. That is beyond helpful. So thank you.
Wonderful. I think that we are unfortunately out of time, but really, really good questions and an amazing session. Hillary, just to let the girls know, Hillary has offered to speak with you separately via email. So we'll provide her contact information after today's program.
Thank you so much, and good luck to everybody. I'm super excited to hear the outcomes.
Thank you, Hillary. So we are moving to our third speaker, and excuse me, Marlene. We are honored to introduce our next speaker, Marlene Kane, who will be covering the art of public speaking. Marlene Kane is the program director for AAUW California's Speech Trek program. Some of the girls on the call may have participated in Speech Trek previously. It's an annual speech contest for our high school students. In the public service arena, Marlene has served as the chairman of the board of directors for the Big Bear Chamber of Commerce. She was reelected 5 consecutive times and currently sits on that board. In the work world, Marlene is a professional expert with the local community college district and is known as an enter-trainer who has enter-trained thousands of employees on communication skills that last a lifetime. She is a published writer and an award-winning speaker. Toastmasters International named her a distinguished Toastmaster, its highest award for leadership and communication. This morning, she's looking forward to helping you master the art of public speaking. So please, let's give a warm welcome to Marlene Kane.
Thank you, Shauna, so much. And we can stay on this slide just for a few moments. Because of the kind of work that I do in career counseling, I often will ask people, how did you choose your present job? And the answer I get back most often is, choose it. Oh, I didn't choose it. I just sort of fell into it. And I'm always amazed at this answer, because it seems to me that these people seem to spend more time picking out their next pair of designer jeans than they do about their life's work or their career. My path was a little different. I was a little more intentional about my career choices. After I graduated college with my communications degree, I looked around, did a career search at my placement center, and I chose the publishing industry to begin my career. And there I learned how to sell a product in a professional environment. I was very lucky to learn that skill. I still use that skill today. And that led on to working as a recruiter, as a headhunter, where I learned to sell people, actually. And that led to work as a consultant in an industry that I knew nothing about. One time, someone who knew me said, you know, you would be really good in outplacement. And I said, great. What is outplacement? And so I researched it. I did more about it, learned more about it. And it turns out it was work I was born to do, helping employees who were in transition. And now I work as a consultant, helping thousands of people in their communication skills. So I'm hoping that in the future, if someone asks you, how did you fall into that job? I'm hoping you'll say, fall into it. Oh, I didn't fall into it. I chose it. Ironically, though, many people do not choose to speak in public. Next slide, please. May we have the next slide, please? There we go. They choose not to speak in public because they seem to be afraid. You know, there was a survey done some time ago, an informal survey about people's greatest fears, and the number 2 fear was fear of death. And the number 1 fear was fear of public speaking. And I always thought Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, nailed it perfectly. He said, well, that means then that at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. So fear seems to be a great common denominator of a lot of people. And if you feel afraid to speak up, do not worry about that. It's very common and it's very natural to have butterflies when you speak. But today I'm going to help you take those butterflies and train them to fly in formation. Part of that is learning how to overcome the fear. Next slide, please. So how do you overcome the fear? Well, knowledge, you may have heard, is very powerful. A little bit of knowledge is very powerful. And today I'm going to give you some of these tools to overcome the fear. Starting with, you know, it's really great to know what you're talking about. Know your topic. And you might take the advice that young writers will often get. Their advice is write about what you know. So speak about what you know, at least in the beginning. And the more you know your topic, the more comfortable you'll begin to feel, and that anxiety level will begin to reduce just a little bit. You'll be able to sharpen your focus in the areas where you really have an interest. And of course, once you start putting your thoughts together, as our previous speaker said, you want to practice that so that you become more comfortable in delivering your speech or your presentation. Next slide, please. So it also helps to know the basics of communication. And any element, any presentation that you give, any speech that you give, if you really want it to be effective, it must contain these 3 elements. Number 1, has to be organized. It has to be organized. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Otherwise, your audience will have trouble following you. And number 2, it just should have a purpose. Have a purpose. What's your purpose? Is it to inform? Is it to educate? Is it to entertain? What is the key purpose of your speech or presentation? And third, it should be reliable. It should definitely be reliable. In fact, I would put this number 1. You should be considered a trusted source. Part of being reliable is that your information that you're giving is accurate. And the reason I would put that first is if you're not deemed a trustworthy source, if your information is not considered accurate, then frankly, in my view, it doesn't matter how organized it is or what your purpose was, your credibility will be greatly diminished. Next slide, please. So here's how you might understand, we'll delve a little bit deeper in how to know your topic. First of all, when you're just starting out, pick something that you already have knowledge of or you already have an interest in. And it's really a good practice to know more about it than you put in your presentation. Because if you're asked a question afterwards, you'll be able to answer it. And so it's just really handy to have more about it than you have in your speech. And as you've heard before, using personal stories is a great way not only to reduce your level of anxiety because it's your story and you know what it is, but it also engages your audience. So you get a lot more bang for your buck there. And it helps you remember what to say as well. So it really helps to know your topic. Next slide, please. So when you know your topic, you'll be able to focus your remarks. And what you're focusing on are 2 key areas: what you say and how you say it. What you say is the content, and how you say it is the delivery, right? So content, delivery, content and delivery, they are equal partners in giving an effective speech. You could have the greatest content in the world, but if they cannot hear you or understand you, it becomes a very meaningless exercise. Or you could have a very dynamic delivery. But if your content is weak, then your credibility will also be diminished. So really try to make sure that what you say, the content, is as strong as your delivery is how you say it. Next slide, please. So you also saw to whom on there, and this was brought up by our previous speakers, and I completely support that. Understand who your audience is for sure. To whom are you speaking? Are you speaking to 2 students? Are you speaking to a room full of people? Are you speaking to contributors? Are you speaking to the president? Who are you speaking to? Because that definitely will inform how you put your speech together. This is a great roadmap for you if you want to kick it up a notch and make sure that your presentation is both powerful and professional. And this is also on a handout available to you on the website. Some of you may already have printed this out. So again, decide your purpose. What is your purpose? Is it, again, to inform, or is it to persuade, as you saw earlier? Is it to be humorous? Is it to commemorate, educate? What is your key purpose? And who are you speaking to? Who is your audience? Now, the third bullet, this is something that I find very helpful, and very few people do this. Try to write down your key message in 1 sentence. Just 1 sentence. If you find that you're having trouble writing it down in 1 sentence, that would tell me that you're not quite ready to deliver your speech, to write your speech. Maybe your content isn't quite well developed. Maybe you have to do more research. But if you can write it down in 1 sentence, you're well on your way. It means you know what you're trying to deliver, what your key message is. Once you do write down that 1 sentence and you're ready to draft your speech, every presentation has 3 parts to it. Basic 3 parts: an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment and how that works. And as you draft your outline, and by the way, a draft is a first pass. It doesn't have to be perfect. You may think of your conclusion first. Great, jot it down. And as you begin to develop your speech, you'll begin to proof it. You'll begin to polish it and make it shine. And then you'll practice it. And then you will be ready, and your butterflies will be more information. You may still feel a little nervous, but that's okay. You can channel that nervousness into some real good energy and then present your presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so just real quick, what is the purpose of the introduction? You heard Hillary say that it's attention getting, and she's exactly right. In fact, an audience will often use your introduction to decide whether they want to hear the rest of it or not. And they'll take that up in the first 20 or 30 seconds. So you want your introduction to be strong and attention-getting. Next slide. You want your body of your speech, which is the meat of your speech, the content, the key points that you're trying to talk about. You want that to be well developed. One good technique is to make your first point and then tell a story to illustrate that point. Make your second point, tell another story, and so forth. Is one way you can develop the body. Next slide, please. And the conclusion, the conclusion, everybody, well, yeah, a conclusion, that's when you end your speech. That's correct. But there's a missed opportunity in the conclusion, because since an audience remembers most what they heard last, the conclusion is an opportunity to be really powerful. And you heard that a call to action is one way to conclude, absolutely right. But it's also a chance to make an emotional connection with your audience. A good technique here would be to summarize your key points and then end on a very powerful note. In fact, I was listening to Hillary's about the crystal blue lake, I think it was, Hillary. And something just occurred to me that one way I would have ended that possibly would be, if I'm elected, I'll make sure that Lake Blue Crystal lives up to its name. And your audience will always remember that. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's see if I practice what I preach. Here's an example. I'm going to give a speech to high school students, and I'll go over what I will do as my introduction, body, and conclusion. Let's see if I do this as I just spoke about. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so what is my purpose? My purpose is to inspire these students. Who is my audience? These are high school students who are at risk of dropping out of high school. And the purpose of my talk is to encourage them to stay in school. My 1-sentence summary is, I want to demonstrate the benefits of a high school graduate. Okay, that's my one sentence summary. I think I'm ready to go. So how can I start this speech? Well, some people might start it, next slide. Some people might start it this way, as I often hear. Well, it's important to stay in school. Or you might hear, or might say, I want you to stay in school. And that's okay, but in my view, it's kind of weak. It could be stronger. I would rather start off like this. Next slide. Statistics show that high school graduates make more money than high school dropouts. Or I could say, today, I will show you how to make $1 million. Or put another way, I could start out by saying, I can show you how to make $1 million in 3 words. What do you think those 3 words are, by the way? Stay in school. So that's how I prefer to introduce my topic. I think they'll want to hear the rest of what I have to say. And of course, I'm going to back up what I say because I want to be reliable and credible. Next slide. So in my body, I will talk about a true statistic, by the way. It is true. It is documented that on average, a high school graduate over her lifetime will make $1 million more than a high school dropout. In fact, I'll talk about the $1 million moment. The $1 million moment is when a student decides to stay in school. That leads to greater choices, which I would elaborate on, and I would probably include a personal story of some kind. Next slide. This is where I would stop to handle questions. I like to have questions before I conclude a presentation, usually. And the reason is, as I said before, the conclusion is such an opportunity to be very powerful. It's the last thing an audience remembers, and I want them to remember that conclusion, not the fact that we were asking questions necessarily. So I like to build in time for questions, and when I feel I have answered the last question, then I would go to my conclusion, which we'll do now. Next slide, please. So I could conclude this presentation to high school students. I could conclude it by saying, well, you know, that's all I have to say. Or, now you know why it's so important to stay in school. Or this, which I hear so often when someone concludes a speech, I hear this, thank you. I mean, that's okay, but it's, in my view, weak, especially when you have such an opportunity to be more powerful. So what I would do is I would want to leave a more thoughtful, a more impactful way for the audience to remember as they walk away from this presentation. So I would prefer to end it like this. I would say something like, you want $1 million ending? Make $1 million decision. Make it today. Stay in school. Next slide, please. So this is that part. I'm very close to our ending. I did want to add some digital tips because many of us, like what you're doing right now, are speaking online in a digital platform. And so I wanted to make sure you were aware that it's the same preparation as you would do for the for the in-person delivery. Same thing, you would want to write your one sentence summary, you would want to draft an outline and so forth, the same steps. However, in addition to that, there are some differences, right? So have a neutral background when you're speaking. And the reason I say make that bed is because there was a speech contestant who gave a wonderful speech. And then I had 2 judges afterwards say, gosh, that was a wonderful speech she gave, but gosh, I sure wish she had made her bed. And when I looked at the speech, she was speaking from her bedroom, and I have to say it was kind of a mess. So it was distracting to the judges. So you never want to distract your audience. So have a neutral, professional type of background. If you are speaking from your bedroom, do make your bed. That would be great. Just as you would on in-person presentations when you scope out the speaking area and you have a sound check and those kinds of things. Same here online. In a virtual area, virtual delivery, you would want to test your technical requirements ahead of time. The main thing is that you can be heard and you can be seen, for sure. The biggest difference, though, I think, is that to be aware you're on camera. And that's totally different than speaking to a live in-person presentation. I mean, if I were speaking to you now, and if I was looking this way and talking over here and looking over here, you might wonder, what is she looking at? And why isn't she looking directly at me? That's because some people are not used to speaking to a camera. So remember, if you can, that when you are in a virtual delivery, you are speaking to an audience really of one in some ways, and that's your camera. so that people understand that you are speaking to them. Otherwise, they're going to feel kind of left out. Okay, next slide, please. So this is practicing what I preach. I have built time in for questions before I conclude. Are there any questions from the audience about public speaking? Oh, wow, I see someone.
Oh, fantastic. Jolena, go ahead.
Hello and thank you. So how do you stay focused on your topic? Whenever I give a speech or presentation, I tend to forget the order I have things in, and then I try to fill in the blanks, and that makes me look unreliable. How can I fix this?
How can you stay on your remarks?
Yeah, like how can I not try to fill in the blanks like what I want to say? Like I have a script, but then I forget it, and then
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Well, there's a number of ways to answer that question. First of all, everybody forgets something sometime, and I would say number one, that the audience will not know that you skipped anything. The audience will not know that you're nervous, of course, unless you tell them. And some speakers do this. They do say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me get back to my notes. Oh, I forgot to say this. Oh, I'm so nervous." They only know that if you tell them, number one. Number two, a good technique, and this was sort of alluded to earlier, is you can memorize your introduction, which is very important, and your conclusion, very important. And then in the middle, you have your content, and you can be very familiar with it, so that if you do lose your place, you can get back to it fairly quickly. You can also speak from notes, which is an art in itself. You can certainly speak from notes. It's just that you don't want to be reading the entire, like they said, reading from your phone or reading from your notes. You don't want to be doing that, but learning how to speak with notes is a technique in and of itself, and you can certainly do that as well.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
How about Sydney Pixley?
Hi. Something I'd noticed is I give a lot of ASB or student government speeches, and when I try and present big information or like a plan or something like that, I notice people super fast lose interest. So what's the best way to maintain that balance between delivering this big vital information that I want them to remember and hear, but also keeping them interested or listening?
Right. There's a great question. I think it was someone said before that, don't talk too long, people lose interest. One trick or one technique would be to summarize your points, summarize your key points, and don't get too bogged down in detail. And then during a question answering period, they could ask if they want to know more about a certain point, they could ask a question at that time. If you notice people kind of yawning off or whatever, it could be either that they are not interested in the subject or maybe the length of your presentation. So I would say shorten it up a little bit, try to summarize a little bit more, and leave time for questions if they want to know more detail.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anaya.
Hello, good morning. My name is
morning.
Anay.
Hi, Anai.
I ruined it again. I massacred your name. Go ahead.
My question for you today is, how can we emphasize on our tone that we are using? I often also give ASB speeches. I also sit at the district board as a student board member. And when I am giving my board report or public or comment on anything, I want to make sure that my tone represents the importance or the negligence that is going on with this subject.
It's a great question. And, there's a difference between tone and style, too. So when I think of tone, your presentation, no matter what it is, just like in a job interview, it should always be a positive, uplifting tone to your comments. Style is what you bring to it. When you learn how your own voice, when you start to develop your own style, that's a little different. But tone should always be positive. And you notice that I'm smiling. And that goes a long way in communicating ease and confidence. When you smile, your audience smiles. If you're nervous or anxious, your audience is nervous or anxious. So when you smile, you kind of put them at ease, and that helps them understand that you're bringing a positive tone to your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. Anahi? I hope I got that right. We are really out of time, but I want to let Isabella ask her question quickly, please.
And then I'll wrap up.
Okay.
Okay, first I want to say thank you for your super informative presentation on public speaking. You spoke about the importance of a memorable conclusion and also summarizing your key points. How do you recommend summarizing without redundancy, but still leaving your reader with an impactful punch?
Right. I would say pick out the areas that you want to make sure you want them to remember. And don't worry too much about redundancy. People appreciate it because they're not going to remember. If you're giving a 30-minute or longer presentation, they won't remember a lot of it. So whatever you feel is key, go ahead and summarize it. They will appreciate that. It will help them a lot. And then, of course, you end with a powerful or memorable or call to action type of conclusion.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So true to form, on your handout, by the way, and we're going to wrap this up, on your handout, you notice that there's a report card from one of the greatest speakers of all time. Martin Luther King got a C in public speaking. On the screen here is a former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who rose from being an immigrant to our Secretary of State. And she says here how long it took her to develop her voice. So how do you know when you're on your way to being a great speaker? You know, I mean, it's easy to be a great communicator without being a great leader, but you really can't be a great leader without being a great communicator. So how do you know you're on your way? Well, when you develop strong content and you can deliver that strong content very effectively, then you will have conquered the art of public speaking. But more exciting than that to me is when you have developed your unique voice, then you will have discovered the heart of public speaking. And that is a day to be celebrated. Next slide, please. So if you wish to be heard, decide your speech's purpose, write down your message in one sentence, draft that outline and practice. If you follow these steps, next slide, please, you will never, ever be afraid to speak up. Thank you so much. Shauna?
Turn back on my video. Oh, thank you, Marlene. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I know that we have all gained a lot of expert speaking tips from your presentation.
My pleasure.
Marlene has also offered to speak with students or student teams separately, so we will be providing her email address after this session. AAUW would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers. We appreciate your commitment to elevating this next generation of women leaders, and would love to invite you back to attend the Gov Trek finale and campaign competition on March 25th, if your schedule permits. We'll be sending you the registration link, and please join us if you can. So now it's your turn, Gov Trek participants. For the last hour, we're going to be moving into our breakout room activity. We're a little bit late, so it may be about 45 minutes or so, but it's your turn now. So take all of those insights and learnings from our three speakers this morning, and let's start applying it to your campaign simulation. Before we go into the breakout room activity, though, I'd like to just review a few important reminders. So when you go into your team breakout room, you'll have the full 45 minutes to finish defining your campaign strategy. We started that last week. Some of you may have already finished it, but I assume that some haven't either. So please finish going through those bullet points on your project description document and defining your campaign strategy as a team. And then you can separate into sub-teams if that's what you choose to do today. We've made that possible by making additional breakout rooms. So for example, for team one, there's 1A, there's 1B, there's 1C. So your communications directors can go into 1A, your field volunteer managers can go into 1B, and so on. and some people can stay in the main breakout room. That's totally optional, but we made that available to you. And before you do separate, please make sure you are clear about what each of you need to complete for your final campaign package. As of today, you have 3 classroom hours left. You have a total of 3 weeks before your project is due. So nothing to be too nervous about, but please plan your time accordingly. If you cannot finish in the next 3 hours of classroom time, please plan accordingly to do your work outside of this program. And one more point before you break off into your subtasks, or I'm sorry, your sub teams, you can, at this point, as a team, you can negotiate your roles. Or you can swap roles. You can discuss who might be better at one task versus another. This is a time for you guys to communicate and really step up and say, hey, you know what? I like communications better than voter outreach. Although you did give us your preference and we did our best to assign you to your current role, this is your opportunity. You know, maybe you would like to be the campaign manager because you know how to do, you know how to use Canva. Canva is the tool that we're suggesting you use to pull together your entire campaign package video. So if someone has those tech skills, I would suggest you mention that to your team members. So again, this is your time to negotiate and then come out of that conversation knowing what it is that you're contributing to the campaign over the next 3 weeks, and you're free to break off into your separate groups if that's what you choose. Okay, so let's see. I wanted to just a couple more things. I wanted to mention that the political campaign project description has been updated. There's one small important update. Your neighborhood canvassing maps and district maps. It's regarding those. I just, as a team and the Gov Trek committee and our facilitator volunteers have decided that it would be a better learning lesson for you to identify a specific jurisdictional office to be running a campaign for. Originally, that wasn't defined, you know, so maybe you weren't clear on what you needed to do. Maybe you were going to make up an office or a district. We're suggesting find a specific district that you can run, and an office that you can run for. That district map will be available online. Google it. I know that one team has chosen to do a supervisor race in, I believe it was LA or LA County. Google that and you will find the district map. Now, for a canvassing map, those are not available online. So what we're suggesting is that you need to create one by using either a city map. So let's say it was Los Angeles, you know, identify an area in or maybe, I don't know if it would be the entire area of LA, but a map of LA, a specific area of LA or a specific population that you're targeting, right? For your canvassing, for your door-to-door canvassing, and use that as your visual. There are other maps available too. You can look at demographic maps. Those are available as well. So, you know, how many, if your voter audience are Latinos or seniors or the like, whatever you are choosing, you can likely find maps like that online. So I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, please let us know. And so that was the update to your project description document. And can we go to the website, please, so that we can show the girls what other resources are now available, and then we can go into our breakout rooms. Hi, Sandy. Thank you. So let's see. So we have lots of good stuff for you girls and examples. So if you're still not clear what it is that you need to do, we have examples. If you take a look go to Stump Speeches, you can click on any of these folks that are running for office, or have run for office, and you can listen to their speeches. You can look at Nikki Haley, for example, who just kicked off her 2024 presidential campaign. This is interesting, and it's interesting to watch because she's focused on something that a lot of you might be focused on, calling for a new generation of leadership, and that was what she based her announcement on. You can look at Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez for Congress, and she too was focused more on diversity and equity and inclusion of people that are systemically eliminated from running for Congress. I mean, there's another one, Gen Z, Maxwell Frost. I don't know if you've heard of him. So he's out of Florida. So check out these examples. I won't go into any more detail. Also, there's a campaign stump speech template, as you see at the bottom there. If you click on that at the bottom of the stump speech section, click on that, and this will give you a step-by-step outline for how to write a stump speech, thanks to Hillary Nemchik. And okay, so for voter outreach plans, take a look at these resources. Again, there's some articles, and there's some YouTube videos that will give you a better idea of a voter outreach plan. Unfortunately, we don't have a template for you, but we do. Please take a look at your project description document. Okay, and then finally we have campaign flyers and ads, and I'm sure that the girls on this call at your age, and with the way that the world is so digital today, you know what an ad looks like, and you know what a flyer looks like. Please keep in mind that you can also do an event flyer, right? A lot of our wonderful speakers today talked about events that you want to help get out the vote, or go out and speak one-on-one with your voters. So feel free to create an event flyer, and not just a political candidate flyer. Event flyers are right as well. And then the last thing I want to show you before we go is the sample campaign package. That's weird. Maybe, do we need a refresh? I know I saw it up there. Oh, there it is. Okay, campaigns.
I think it's up here.
Campaign simulation example. Yes, okay. So this is from our wonderful Gov Trek intern. She's a college intern. Her name is Tomasa, and she's also serving as a facilitator. She created a sample video for you. So like a 6 minute or 6.5 minute video, campaign video, which is exactly what you are turning in. That's your project, right? That's your final project. She gave you an example here. So please go check it out. Okay, I hope that this has been helpful. We're giving you a lot of new tools and resources. I think we are ready to go off into our breakout rooms and get to work.